Okay, here's our first Saptamsa example. The place to start with in the Saptamsa is by analyzing Jupiter, which is the important planet in the Saptamsa. And that's going to show the full creative potential that the person has in conjunction with another person to create something to leave as their dynasty. Jupiter is in a natural friend sign ruled by Mars, so it gets some mudita, delight on account of that. Jupiter's not conjunct any planets in the Rashi chart. But you will notice in the Rashi chart, Jupiter's in the very last degree. So that means he's mritya, or dead. And that deadness is going to affect him throughout all the charts. Now remember, a planet in the last 6 degrees of an odd sign becomes dead. And it tapers, it gets more dead the closer it gets. When it's right at the end, like 29, 59, 59 of Libra, it's like really, really dead. This thing's in its last little death throes. It just it's not a Jupiter that has a lot of strength, okay, as far as Jupiter is in general in this chart. And that's going to affect Jupiter throughout all the Vargas. Now here Jupiter is at the end of Aries in the Saptamsa. And you remember our planet is strong at the beginning of its Varga and becomes weaker as it goes to the end. So Jupiter's getting towards the end of Aries here. So you see, just degree-wise, this is not a super robust Jupiter. But at least he's getting delighted by Mars over here, by being in Mars' sign. Unfortunately, his Lord Mars is sleeping in Virgo. So Mars can't really delight him much because he's sleeping. Okay, so it's not a really great Jupiter. Now Jupiter does pick up some strength from the Sun, who aspects Jupiter to 47 points. And the Sun's exalted, so that's a good dose. But you notice the Sun is a little weak. He's getting towards the end of the sign. But he does give Jupiter some more delight. The Moon aspects as well. And the Moon is a friend of Jupiter. Unfortunately, the Moon is in the first 3 degrees of Scorpio, where he's debilitated or sleeping. So he's not helping Jupiter. Mars is aspecting Jupiter to 16, but as we've seen, he's sleeping, so he can't do any good. Mercury's in a natural neutral sign and therefore able to hurt Jupiter to 37 points. And he's more at the beginning of the sign, see, so his aspect's going to be a little more stronger. Venus is in a natural friend sign as well, and so he's going to starve Jupiter a little bit as well. So Jupiter has a mixed influence, about 50-50 of being delighted and starved. It's just a so-so planet. He's not great by any means, but he's not totally incapable either. I'd say the worst thing about this Jupiter is just he's on this very last degree of this sign. He's getting very close to being totally dead in the Rashi chart. At least he gets some help, but he's a mediocre Jupiter at best. Okay? So that means, they're not going to be really productive with their partnerships. They're not going to really have a lot of energy in life to create a dynasty. Okay? Now, but they'll be of average. There won't be an abundance of this energy to create a dynasty through children or doing something great in the world, but there'll be an average degree of that. Okay? Now, the most important bhava in the Saptamsa, of course, is the seventh bhava. Because that's the bhava of being embraced by the public or embraced by someone that results in conception. The 7th bhava lord is Mercury. And actually, before I get to that, I wanted to mention another planet that's always nice to look at in the Saptamsa is Venus. It's, really you can look at all of them, but Venus after Jupiter is the most interesting planet to look at. While Jupiter has to do with the actual capacity to create a dynasty, Venus is the comfort of the embrace, or the enjoyment and pleasure of the embrace that results in that dynasty. So that indicates, Venus in the Saptamsa indicates just how good someone's sex life is, and just how good, if they are being embraced by the public, how good their relationship with the public is. Are they someone who's always getting scorned by the public and in the bad tabloids, or are they someone who everyone loves and adores and showers things on? So Venus will kind of answer that in those types of people. So looking at Venus is in Capricorn, a natural friend sign. Venus is joined, so he gets delighted there. Venus is joined by his friend Mercury and the Rashi. So Mercury is going to delight him a bit, and Mercury is in a neutral sign, so he can give some delight. Then Venus is aspected by his enemy Moon, who's sleeping, and so not going to be able to hurt him. By his neutrals Mars and Jupiter, which don't care. And by his friend, who's an exalted Saturn. And this is a strong Saturn because, look, it's at the very beginning of its sign, too. So it's not at the end like the Sun is, where it's losing strength. It's really up the front. So it's a really strong, exalted aspect to Venus. So Saturn's giving Venus a tremendous amount of delight. So this is a really delighted Venus. So to quote this client, the way they said it, with their first boyfriend, which they had for a few years, who was an older person than them, after that, they felt like they never had to have sex ever again. Because the sex was so much and so great, they never felt like they had to have it again, basically. Okay, so they made a comment in respect to their sexual life having been very delightful. Okay, it's a good Venus there. When you get people who've got afflicted Venuses in the Saptamsa, that's when we get people who are, finding frustrations in their sexual life. Okay, and because there's a lot of Venus delight on Venus, this was not a kind of person who walked around really needing to have sex. And that's always the result of Venus being unhappy in the Saptamsa, where it's sexually frustrated and then there's a greater sexual need. This person had, didn't have any of that kind of lustful qualities to them, okay? Because Venus is really nice. Now some people might say, oh, Saturn aspecting Venus makes you lustful. No, it doesn't. Saturn's a friend. Aspecting Venus, it, is good for making Venus choose wisely in sexual matters. Wisely, not wildly, wisely in sexual matters. Now Saturn conjunct Venus, on the other hand, will starve Venus, and then we can get, unhappy and excessive sexuality. But we don't get that with Saturn aspecting it. So Venus is great, okay? But Jupiter's not really so good. Now let's look at the 7th house. Okay? And also, actually, that great sex part of their life happened in Venus Dasha. Okay? And Venus, just so you know, they didn't have children during Venus Dasha. They never conceived during Venus Dasha. Venus is not a strong planet in general. It's Dasha for giving children. Okay, it's not the strongest. The reason is because it's an enemy of Jupiter. And in Gemini astrology, Venus is actually one of the planets that's more inclined to deny children. Okay, so Venus has to be doing a lot of really powerful things to really give children. Okay, and they didn't have it. That was the great sex part of their life, was in Venus Dasha. Okay, now we can go to the 7th house. That's the house of being able to be productive with the other party, to be productive with the public, to be productive with their partner, okay, and create a dynasty of some sort. And this is where this chart gets really interesting. Let's look at the Lord first. Its Lord is Mercury. And you'll see Mercury is right at 1421 Pisces. It's right in what we call deep debilitation, which is the 15th degree of Pisces. When a planet is in deep debilitation, everything it's going to do in all Varga charts gets dramatically reduced. Okay, it really, really slugs that planet out. In fact, Brihat Parashara tells us that the dasha of a planet in deep debilitation, which means between 14 and 15 degrees for Mercury. Okay, it's deep debilitations at 15, so it's that degree before 15 degrees. Or you can extend it to 16, but the degree before 15 is worse. The dasha of a planet in deep debilitation is anishta, which means empty. So they're not expecting this planet to really be productive. And it's that critical 7th Lord in the Saptamsa. Now, Mercury, how's it doing? Well, it's conjunct its friend Venus. So Venus is giving Mercury some delight. Okay? How much light Venus can give is going to be a little less because he's at the end of his sign, but he's going to get some delight from Venus. Mercury is aspected by his enemy moon, who's starting with Mercury's in his natural neutral sign in the sign of Jupiter, so he's just so there. Then Mercury is influenced by his enemy moon, who's starved, his neutral Mars and neutral Jupiter. So moon's not going to hurt Mercury because moon's sleeping. He's sleeping, so he's not starving Mercury. Then he's aspected by his other neutral, Saturn. So Mercury does get some delight from Venus. Okay? And Venus Dasha, as it was, they haven't had Mercury Dasha, of course, but Venus Dasha was the period where they had their most successful relationship. So Mercury's got a little delight from Venus. Okay? But it's not a great Mercury because it's right at its debilitation point here. And when a planet's in deep debilitation, it just dramatically reduces its ability to be productive. Then, when a planet's moving towards its deep debilitation, which means for Mercury it's moving from 15 Virgo to 15 Virgo this way to 15 Pisces, that means it's in what we call an Avarohini planet, which means it's a not growing planet. When a planet's moving from deep debilitation towards exaltation, it's what we call a growing planet. And it can be more fruitful, more growth-oriented, and more productive, especially over the long term. So the reason this planet's so bad is not only is it right at 15 degrees of its deep debilitation, it's actually in the non-growing stage or the shrinking stage. And that makes Mercury have a really, really hard time being productive. So before we tell you the story behind this person, let's look at the 7th Bhava. 7th Bhava, you can see the dignities of the planet. In this chart, when it comes to influencing Bhavas, the Sun, Venus, and Saturn will help a Bhava. The Moon and Mercury will hurt a Bhava because they're in a debilitation and enemies. Mars and Jupiter are neutral, so they'll only help their own Bhavas but ignore everybody else's. So the 7th Bhava is aspected by the Sun, who's helping at the 12 points, by neutral Mars, by Mercury, his enemy, or who's in an enemy sign, you'll see here. But Mercury is the Lord of the 7th, so he can help out the 7th to a tiny, tiny bit. By Jupiter, who's in a neutral sign, and Venus, who's in a great friend sign. So basically, if we add 12 and 6, we get 18, plus not even 1 point for Mercury, so basically 18 point, very fraction. About 18 points of good stuff onto the 7th Bhava. In addition to that, the 7th Bhava is conjunct Saturn and Moon. The Moon's debilitated in the Saptamsa. So the Moon is going to hammer the 7th house. Saturn's exalted in the Saptamsa. He's going to help it. So there is some good stuff on the 7th house, but there's really some bad stuff. And what is the really good stuff? Well, exalted Saturn. What's the really bad stuff? Debilitated Moon. Then there's a little bit of help by the Sun and Venus, but those are just a little bit. They're not a whole lot of help. The big players on the 7th Bhava are the Moon and Saturn. One debilitated and one exalted. So the interesting about this person in their partnership life, things are either got so much potential, they're really in the embrace with Saturn, they're really striving for productivity with that partner, which is Saturn, because Saturn's exalted there, or the Moon's debilitated, or it's going completely falling apart. And not just sort of there's problems, but completely falling apart. And this also happened in their career, which was a public career, where they could have created, a great, public, had fans and stuff. And right when they were at the height of their public career, which was modeling, they just threw it all in. They just quit. They just left in an overnight situation. They just walked out of their career at a time when they were making $300,000 a year modeling. at the time when they were about to get the cover shot of a magazine that would have immortalized them, um, and just let everything just go away, just left it cold, and that's the debilitated moon. And this person's been the same with their partners, from designing a house, planning a great marriage, developing a huge organic garden with their partner that they're planning to marry, to leaving the day of the wedding and not showing up on the altar. So it's always this extremely, everything is just so perfect for being productive with the public or the partner, to just demolishing it completely, exalted and debilitated. Okay? As a result, this person has never managed to achieve any dynasty of public, due to the public embracing their work as a model, or their later work, which was in a very in a health, intellectual orientated field, which they also did wonderful in. But right when they were about to achieve, more greater renown in that, they just disappeared. Boom. So, this is that person's life. They haven't created a dynasty. They've been on the verge of it with Saturn, and they're working towards it, but then the moon always comes in and smashes it. But it's always these extremes of, exalted productivity with partnership or public, but right before that potential gets realized, the moon comes and smashes it all, and just throws everything out and disappears. Okay, so it's a really interesting dynamic that's going on with that. And the seventh bhava itself is simply not strong enough to really be productive more than average. So here's a person, while they have the beauty and while they have the brains now that they're older, to be, to really leave their mark on the world. The Saturn-Moon dynamic, in conjunction with the mediocre Jupiter, who's, dead here, has not allowed them, to create any dynasty at all. No children, nothing to be remembered by, no public embrace that really leaves them with anything. Okay, no one's going to be collecting their things. No one's going to be studying the system of healing that they've developed. So, so a lot of talent and a lot of beauty, and none of it having left a dynasty, and also, a lot of sex in Venus Dasha, but none of it having leaving children either. Okay, now for judging the real potential children, we should always look with Gemini too. But this bad Jupiter being in the really last degree of a sign points towards that direction. And then the seventh lord in the Saptamsa being Mercury, who's debilitated, in deep debilitation and moving towards that worst point of 15 degrees Pisces, is a really strong indication of denying children right there. Okay? Alright, the other important bhava, besides the seventh, is the first bhava we talked about. Let's look at the first bhava. There's no planets in it in the Rashi, and it's aspected by exalted sun to 42, but then hurt by debilitated moon to 43. Then it's hurt by Mercury in an enemy sign to 33 points. It's helped by Jupiter, because Jupiter's the lord of the bhava. Jupiter's a neutral, but he's the lord of the bhava. Then it's really helped by Venus, and really, really helped by Saturn. So between Saturn, Sun, and Venus and Jupiter, you can see there's a lot more good influences than the harm caused by Moon and Mercury. So it's a 2/3 good first bhava and a 1/3 bad. So this is a strong personality, a personality that takes, that people want to adore or want to follow. This person was very physically attractive. Physically, people wanted to embrace them. The public was ready to embrace them, and also the men were always ready to embrace them. In fact, this is a person who famous Hollywood celebrities have hit on, asked out, and so on. Okay? Arnold Schwarzenegger hit on this girl. Okay, so just some funny backgrounds there. I don't want to get too delayed, but you get an idea. There's a good first house. Exalted sun, exalted Saturn. Exalted planets always bring a strength of beauty and personality to a person that makes people look up to them. They're exalted. They give they have a strong magnetism like royalty or nobility because of those exalted planets. And they have two of them. And then, of course, there is that debilitated moon. So a good observer would notice also the real weakness in personality that's there, and might notice the thing that makes you maybe not want to touch them and not want to embrace them. But for the most part, that's going to be overwhelmed by the strong sun and Saturn aspecting the first, and the Lord, and Venus too. So really a pretty good first bhava. And so they had that. The seventh bhava, particularly the seventh lord, just wasn't good enough to create a dynasty, even though they had that good first bhava. Then the other important bhava is the fourth bhava, because that is the place that your dynasty has to expand and grow in the world. Okay? The fourth lord is Mercury again. Not very good, because Mercury is so close to this deep debilitation here. Okay? The person born a day after her is going to have Mercury at about, it will be about 16 degrees of Pisces. It'll be past its totally worst debilitation point. It'll be growing. You can bet that person's Mercury, let them have children. Even if they had a Pisces logged in the Saptamsa and Mercury was still in the same Saptamsa, still in Sagittarius, and everything else was the same, except the moon would have moved a little bit. Moon would have probably moved to Sagittarius or something. That person's Mercury could have given children. It's just that fatal degree, right, moving into it is really bad news. So anyway, the fourth bhava is the same thing. The fourth lord is not giving a lot of room for their dynasty to expand. Okay, well, what dynasty, right? But when there's no room for something to expand, there's less chances for it expanding. It's like this. When you've got a weak animal, it's going to die just due to competition in the environment, right? But if the animal is weak and there's no competition in its environment, it can still thrive. So it's the same with the dynasty. If the environment is really good, which is the fourth bhava in the Saptamsa, that can assist and support the generation of offspring and the generation of the dynasty. Okay? So Mercury is not giving that. Well, let's look at the fourth bhava itself. It gets helped by first there's no planets in the fourth bhava, which falls here in Virgo, in the Rashi. No planets in Virgo. The fourth cusp is influenced by exalted sun to 18, but then beat down by the debilitated moon to 32 points. Okay? Aspected by neutral Mars, aspected by Mercury really strongly. Mercury's in an enemy sign, but since he's the Lord, he can help to about 2 points. Not much, okay? 1 or 2 points. Then the fourth bhava gets helped by Venus and helped by Saturn. Okay? There's some good help in this bhava. The fourth bhava looks pretty good. And so the environment has opened up to them. They've had opportunities. They were setting up the perfect household owned by a billionaire with everything they wanted in a house, where this person could have just kicked back and been a wife, and had no stress in life, which was a perfect environment, of course, for creating offspring. But the debilitated Lord didn't let it. And you'll notice as we look at these videos, you always see the Lord always tends to be more important with what the person actually does and what they actually enjoy than it does the bhava. So the environment at times has been set up for this person, but they've never taken advantage of those environments because of Mercury. Same in their modeling career, same in their healing career, which followed after that. There was periods when the environment was set up for them to really boom. In fact, last I heard from this person, they were set up to start doing some internet writing. And this is just when the internet was just going, and they would have just been at the top of their field, like the first person doing this. a really super intelligent person with a lot of talent who could have just flown, and they had someone who was ready to pay them to do this stuff. Well, you can search this person's name if I give it to you, which I'm not, all day long, and you would not find this person's name on the internet anywhere, okay? Because that Lord, Mercury, is just not good. So the Lord kind of always shows what we do with something. It's what our consciousness does with something. It rules that thing. So it always boils down to the logitati of Ashtas, of what's happening to those planets, is always going to be more important than the actual bhava itself, okay? So this Mercury ruined this thing again, okay? So this is a chart that would take some careful studies, and I haven't formally taught this debilitation principle. Whenever you see a planet moving into that last degree of debilitation, you know, for Mercury between 14 and 15 degrees, that's when you have to be very concerned about that planet really not being able to be really productive. This chart. Okay, so we've looked at the important bhavas, we've looked at the important planets and the bhava lords. So we get a good picture of this person not really having, those planets aren't really set up for leaving a lot of a great dynasty. Okay? What's the worst planet in the chart? That's always good to always look at worst and best, because that shows us the extremes of that area of the person's life. Well, the moon's in deep debilitation. He's a starter for being one of the worst, right? However, the moon gets some help from his sun. Then he gets starved by this really strong Saturn. And, you know, Saturn's exalted here, starving the moon. He's influenced by his friend Mars, but Mars is sleeping. Mars, of course, moon's in a natural friend sign, though in debilitation, but Mars is sleeping, so no help there. He's aspected by neutral Jupiter and neutral Venus. So this is a debilitated and totally starved due to this strong Saturn influence. You know, totally starved moon. So it's the worst planet in the chart. Okay? And so this is the planet that's going to disturb their ability to leave their dynasty more than anything. Well, first, what is the moon as a karaka? It's their attitude, right? Okay? You know, an attitude that's not emotionally in synchronicity with bringing out the best of these type of events, of leaving a dynasty, being productive with people. Why? Well, let's see. Moon rules the sixth bhava. That gives us a clue, which is disease and health. Well, this person was really plagued by health problems all their life, or from a pretty young age, you know, like, gosh, I'm not sure when exactly, mid-20s or late 20s. I don't remember when the first things happened, but they had health problems. And those health problems at times left them so debilitated all they could do is sleep all day and then get up and go on a hike. And then they'd sleep the rest of the day, like when they had chronic fatigue and Epstein-Barr. And then they've had, you know, all kinds of things, kidney failure, you name it. They've had health problems. And of course, and those are the things that have really destroyed the capacity for her to create this, a dynasty. You know, she just physically, even if she was able to maintain a partner, which the Saturn-Moon conjunction in the 7th house really makes difficult to do, you know, she wasn't really feeling healthy enough to even think about having children. So this moon is really what's destroyed her productivity. It's likely health reasons were the reason that they didn't take advantage of the internet stuff that they were offered. But it wasn't a health problem, it was an attitudinal problem. But a lot of that attitude was the result of just an ailing body that was just not feeling good a lot of the time. Okay? And you'll remember that that troublemaking, debilitated moon aspects the Lagna to 43 points. And that's the health weakness that you see in their body, which does diminish the beauty and the magnetism that the Sun, Saturn, and Venus gave to the body. Okay? So, you know, health was why they did it. And then other times this person would be really energetic, have plenty of energy, work practically around the clock because of these other strong planets influencing the ascendant. But in the end, it was that worst planet, the moon, that really caused these most problems in the Saptamsa. Okay? Now, moon is in Dadi Saptamsa. Okay? Now you remember the Dadi Saptamsa is a Saptamsa of, as we're going along the creative way, it's doing, making the changes that are necessary to bring about the offspring or the dynasty, to adapt to it, making the adaptation. Okay? Well, with that moon being in Dadi, that's the level that the moon fails. That's when the attitude breaks down, or that's when they let their health get in the way. Is when things aren't just falling into place and there's that need to make that adjustment to really be productive with someone. And that's when they refuse to make that adjustment. Now, if the moon had been in Dadi Saptamsa, and again, that's the yogurt Saptamsa, and not being in such bad shape, not been starved to death, then the moon would have really easily adopted an attitude of evolution, adjustment, and change, and adaptation, and would have worked right through that. But that's the point that always got it, that Mars quality, Dadi, Saptamsa, when there was a problem that needed to be fixed, that moon could not come up with an attitude to deal with the problem. It was either just to let it all drop. And that's what they did every time. Okay? In their life. So that moon, that's the level where the moon broke off. Okay? So if they're running moon dasha, it's going to destroy their productivity with the person or the public. Why? Because they can't make the adjustments they need around the problems to make things work with that person. And there's always an adjustment that needs to get made. You know what I mean? It's just, things don't just work by themselves. You got to do a little bit of work. Okay? Always, and that's where this moon fails them. Okay? What's the Jupiter's, it's always good to look at Jupiter's, the important planets thing here. Saptamsa Lord. So that's Shuddha Jala, pure water, because it's at the very end of it. So this Jupiter is very detached about what it does create. Any dynasty it left, it wouldn't really be that attached most likely. If Jupiter's decent? Well, let's remember how Jupiter is. He's weak because he's at the end of the sign. But how was he? Well, he's influenced by Sun to helping him, by his friend Moon who can't do anything, by his friend Mars who's sleeping so can't help him, his enemy Mercury, and enemy Venus. Okay? So Jupiter has some good strong stuff from the Sun, but some bad stuff from Mercury and Venus. So it's a mediocre Venus, Jupiter. So Jupiter's in the phase of just letting its creations do what they want, not being attached to them. They're able to do that relatively well, not perfectly, because there is the problems of Mercury and Venus behind things, and those will make them want to control their creations a little too much. But then there's the Sun, which gives it the independence to let the life it creates go. So it's a mixed Jupiter. It's not good, but at least it's a Jupiter that's not going to have an agenda to create something, because it's in the last Saptamsa, which is Saturn, which is more detached. So this person, never had an agenda for children per se, and that Jupiter sort of helped them do that. Okay, had they have children, part of them would have been able to let go of the child a lot. Like they wouldn't have had to feel like they had to tell the child what career to pick and things like that, because the Sun is really helping Jupiter. But they would have had a tendency to perhaps overteach their children, because Venus is influencing Jupiter and not letting the child learn enough about life by its own, and maybe wanted to teach their children too much had they had them. But of course, they didn't. And of course, Mercury might want to manage their children a little too much on the Jupiter. But they didn't have children, but those would have been areas of greater attachment and harder for them to let go of. But if Jupiter's not going to give you children, the best Saptamsa to have it in is in the last Saptamsa, because then you're going to be a lot less detached about not having children. Okay? A lot more detached about not having it, and it won't become a big area of regret in your life, basically. Okay. Lord, seventh Lord's the most important. Mercury is in Aja Saptamsa. Okay. And Mercury, of course, we've seen is, while it has some help of friends to it, of Venus, namely Venus, it just doesn't have that productive strength it needs because it's so bad in the Rashi chart. It's just Mercury's bad in every varga in this person's chart and can't have the total fulfillment. However, Mercury at least is in a good Saptamsa. It was in the Aja Saptamsa, which is the Saptamsa of related to Mercury, ruled by Mercury. And since Mercury is weak, he doesn't get any help from that. The same way, the moon's in the Saptamsa that revolves around Mars, and Mars is sleeping in the Saptamsa, so it doesn't have a lot of ability. And that makes the moon do a little worse in the Saptamsa. Mercury is in Aja, its Saptamsa Lord Mercury is in deep debilitation. So it doesn't give any planet that's in the Aja of Saptamsa, which can be the Saptamsa that has the most energy to generate growth and creativity, is not going to be able to do that good simply because Mercury is in this deep debilitation. The exalted planet Saturn, which is one of the best planets here and the planet that was helping the seventh bhava to the most, it still wasn't able to help it enough for them to really ever be productive with public partnership or in having children. Reason is because it's in the Aja Saptamsa ruled by Mercury. And so the Aja doesn't have as much strength as it needs. Again, that's the Gi Saptamsa of burning the long-term energy to do the long-term process to bring it to fruition. Okay? And they were unable to do that. Okay? Even though Saturn was really trying, it couldn't do that. Okay? Jupiter is the Lagna Lord. It's the other important planet which we've already talked about. So those are the Saptamsa Lords for the most important planets, at least. Okay? Venus is interesting to look at too. Venus is in Dadi, which is the Mars-related Saptamsa, and the Yoga. So this would show sexually there'd be more adaptability. But because Mars, who's sleeping, there'd certainly be less sexual fire in this person. Okay? So this person sexually did have less fire as a result of that, even though they enjoyed a great sex life in Venus, period. So they enjoyed it, but they didn't instigate it. They weren't really super fiery sexually because Mars, the Dadi Lord, was sleeping. Okay? And of course, because Mars is fiery and he's sleeping in the Saptamsa, you're going to have less sexual fire in general. So, that'll give you an idea of how to use these Saptamsa Lords. So, after you look at the Saptamsas of the important house lords, which are the 1st, 4th, and 7th, which we've done, and of Jupiter, and then secondarily of Venus too, it's interesting, then you can always see on what level the person's going to be most productive by looking at the Saptamsa Lords of the best planets, and you can see which, on what levels the person's going to be, their productivity of creating their dynasty is going to fall apart by studying the worst planet. Okay, we've done that, studying at the worst planet, by looking at this debilitated moon in the Dadi. And that's when that need for change and adjustment is required, that they fall apart. Okay, they don't manage it, they don't cop the correct attitude. And then they get into trouble and things fall apart. The best planet in this chart, well, is it Saturn? Saturn's exalted. No, because it's conjunct the moon. Okay. Is it the sun? Let's see, the sun is exalted. Sun's influenced by its friend moon who can't help. Is Mars who can't help. Jupiter who can't help because, Jupiter who helps a little bit, sorry. Mars can't because he's sleeping. But by Saturn who's really starving them. So the sun's not great. Mars is sleeping, Mercury's not great. Venus is probably the best planet, even though he's not exalted, because he gets that friendship of Saturn. Saturn gets hurt by the sun, he gets hurt. Well, the moon is moon is sleeping at least, so he's not hurting it. Mars is sleeping, so he can't hurt it. So actually, Saturn is probably the best planet in this person's chart, followed closely by Venus, who has a lot of delight. So Saturn's Garvita. Sun is Garvita too, but he gets a lot of starvation from Saturn, so he's not as good as he looks on paper or at a first glance just in the chart. So Saturn's probably the best planet. Okay, even though it has that moon conjunction, since the moon's sleeping, he's not able to ruin Saturn in this chart. But the moon does hurt the bhavas it's hurting, because remember, sleeping has nothing to do with a planet's impact on a bhava. Saturn is in Ajya Saptamsa. So this is a Saturn that, the disciplined Saturn that can, persevere through the hardships for a very long time, ideally because it's an Ajya. But because Mercury, who represents the, symbolizes the Ajya quality, is in really bad shape, that Saturn doesn't get that full benefit. While Saturn has it, Mercury itself just doesn't really have it. So the best planet in the Saptamsa gets weakened because it's not in a great, because its Lord, Mercury's in bad shape. Unfortunately, okay? So remember, the Sun rules the Shara Saptamsa, the Moon rules the Shira. Well, let's just show it again. So it's easier if we can see it. And where is it? Okay. Shara has to do with the Sun, Shira to the Moon, Dadya or Dadi to Mars, Ajya to Mercury, Ikshurasa to Jupiter, Madhu to Venus, and Shuddhajala to Saturn. So, in this person's chart, Mars is sleeping. So any planet, Dadya, Mars is sleeping. So any planet in the Dadya Saptamsa is going to be a little stuck. Okay, Mercury is in its deep debilitation. So any planet in the Ajya Saptamsa will be a little stuck. Okay, Saturn's in pretty good shape. So any planet in the Shuddhajala Saptamsa will do better. The Sun's exalted, at least, has some strength to it. So a planet in the Shara Saptamsa will do better. What's in a Shuddhajala? Jupiter we saw. Okay, but it's Mrita, and we've seen otherwise Jupiter's not wonderful. It's okay, but there's just enough other problems. So this is a really sort of interesting Saptamsa where it takes a little bit of a deep look to see all the possible limitations on it. But at first glance, you see debilitated moon. That can alert you. You know that they have a Saturn-Moon conjunction in the 7th house. And that a Saturn-Moon conjunction tends to ruin the house. Remember, a planet in a bad Lajitadya Vashta that's starved destroys the house it's in. So Moon is starving Saturn, Saturn starving Moon. We got 2 starved planets in the key house of the Saptamsa. And that's a huge blemish to this chart. And then it's very much manifested in their life of them not being able to be productive enough. And we know the fear and nervousness and anxiety that Saturn-Moon conjunctions represent, and which is a result of a complete lack of detachment when Saturn and Moon is there. There's a lot of fear and a lack of detachment. And that's what has gotten in the way of being productive with a partner for this person, unfortunately. And basically ruined the possibilities of the Saptamsa. Okay? Okay, enough on this chart. I hope everyone found that one interesting, and we will have another example chart coming up soon. Thank you.